Well, to those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome and thank you for coming. And those of you who are rejoining us from the earlier session, thanks for sticking around. Again, for those of you who are either law students or undergraduate students, we recognize that you may not be able to stay for all of the day's activities. So if you have a class after this hour or the next hour's class infringes on this hour a little bit, feel free to get up and go to your next class. Please try to do so as quietly as you can, but we can't ask you to cut the next class to stay here. I could ask, but a lot of people would get really angry with me, so I'm not going to officially do that. Anyway, thank you for coming. It's now my distinct pleasure to welcome Jim Brady, Vice President and Executive Editor of the Washington Post's online division, WashingtonPost.com, which many of you see every day, sometimes several times a day. Mr. Brady is also a board member of the Online News Association, former Vice President and Editorial Director for AOL, and a former sports reporter and editor at The Post. Mr. Brady has led WashingtonPost.com to numerous awards and accolades since being named Executive Editor of the site in November 2004. Under his leadership, WashingtonPost.com has been focused on combining the world-class journalism of the Washington Post with the endless possibilities of the online medium. Since Mr. Brady came on board, WashingtonPost.com has won a National Emmy Award for its Hurricane Katrina coverage, a Peabody Award for its Being a Black Man series, an Editor and Publisher Award for Best Overall Newspaper Affiliated Website, 2 Digital Edge Awards for Best Overall News Site, a Knight Batten Award for Innovations in Journalism, 2 Scripps Howard Foundation National Journalism Awards, 3 Edward R. Murrow Awards for Best Non-Broadcast Affiliated Website, and more than 100 White House News Photographers Video Awards. Mr. Brady began his online journalism career at WashingtonPost.com in April 1995 when he came from the newspaper to serve as sports editor for the Post's online site, then located on a dial-up network called Interchange. After the Post decided to abandon that effort, Mr. Brady helped build and launch WashingtonPost.com in June 1996. In 1998, Mr. Brady took over as assistant managing editor for news and helped coordinate the site's coverage of the Clinton impeachment proceedings. In 1999, Mr. Brady moved to America Online, where he spent more than 4 years. During his time at AOL, Mr. Brady was in charge of the service's coverage of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the 2000 presidential election. Prior to his first stint at WashingtonPost.com, Mr. Brady was a sports writer at the Washington Post from 1987 to 1995. And during his career, he has also served as the Washington sports correspondent for UPI, interned as a sports writer at Newsday, and worked as a researcher for NBC during the 1992 Summer Games in Barcelona. Please join me in welcoming Jim Brady.
Note to self, get shorter bio. So it's always fun to sit there and listen to people read your biography and realize that's way, way too long. But as you heard, I've been on the web since '95, and when I came to Washington Post, it wasn't even WashingtonPost.com, then it was something called AT&T Interchange, a dial-up proprietary network. Washington Post decided to jump into the dial-up proprietary network bandwagon just as it was basically crashing. So after about 6 months on this thing, we moved to the web. So I've been doing this for 13 years, and one of the great things about working on the web has always been this feeling that you really are making this stuff up as you go in terms of new rules, new ways to deal with the challenges of new technologies, the ways to deal with the fact that readers are now participating very aggressively on our websites. And a lot of the things that we're making up as we go fall in the area of ethics and legal issues. And so I'll talk through some of those. The obvious caveat that, because clearly if I had been a lawyer at any point, it would have been in that massively long bio. I'm not a lawyer. Obviously a working journalist who deals with these issues every day, so I'm probably not going to cite a lot of case precedent, and I'm not going to wow you with my knowledge of the legal world, but I will tell you that it's sort of on the ground level, day-to-day online journalism, one of the things we're dealing with the most right now. They really fall into, we're dealing with things in 6 categories, or 6 different issues, some of them legal, some of them ethical, some of them overlapping. The first one is obviously just speed versus accuracy. That in the world of newspaper journalism, especially the kinds of articles that need to be lawyered the most, investigative enterprise pieces, usually not the timeliest pieces. So you're usually not, you don't have as much of this pressure of trying to get something up quickly and making sure it's been vetted and making sure it's sourced, making sure you've confirmed. On the web, newspapers are now thrown into this world where we're competing with the CNNs, the MSNBCs, and Fox News, and all of these other 24/7 news operations, which has increased the pressure dramatically for us to be competitive, to try to be first, to try to get things up as quickly as possible, which now, of course, jams the amount of time you have to make these calls into a very, very, very short window. So we deal a lot with these right now. I'm dealing with them, we dealt with one just the other day where we had a story that we felt 90% good about, and the reporter, of course, was pushing very aggressively for us to go with the story because it was, it was a couple of graphs we weren't comfortable with. Take them out, we'll go up. But in our mind, the two graphs that we were going to take out undermined the rest of the story, so you couldn't take out that 10% and just publish the story. So we waited a while, managed to get the last 10% of it blurred effectively, got the story up. But the pressure of reporters who want to beat somebody up on a story versus the inherent structural weakness of stories is something we deal with a lot right now. Confirming things is another issue. We all have feeds on our sites. If AP reports that Ted Stevens is going to lose Alaska, for example, we call states on our own at the Washington Post. But we have feeds that are just going onto our site saying, AP says Ted Stevens wins Alaska. So how are we going to handle that when the Washington Post, as an entity, has not called Alaska for Ted Stevens? So we have to deal with the fact that information is flowing onto our site all the time that has not been reported out by Post journalists nor confirmed by Post journalists. So we work very aggressively at making sure that when we do that, the source of that information is clear on the homepage, if we use a story like that on the homepage, which we often don't. So the speed versus accuracy thing is something we kind of a daily struggle. And the one that's most traditionally journalistic. The second one we deal with a lot is transparency and openness, which is not, this one is more ethical than legal. On the web, especially with the rise of the blogosphere, if you report anything, and you would later have to go back and change what that is you've reported, you really sure as hell better put on your website that you changed an earlier version of the story, and you better make it clear what you changed and why you changed it. This is an old, the blogosphere is very good at finding a case where they think you're trying to scrub history. You put something up in one of your stories, 2 hours later you realize you really need to clarify it, change it, correct it. Back in the early days of the website, people thought, God, the web is great. We can just change it. Just change it, no one will ever know we have the wrong thing up. Well, that's changed a lot in the last 5 or 6 years with the blogosphere. There's a lot of ways it's changed. First of all, Google caches things anyway. So if you have a bad version of a story up, it's probably going to be, someone will find it anyway. Even if you go back and change it, an earlier version exists somewhere. But secondly, it's the right thing to do. And the rise of the blogosphere, I think, for all the negativity that's come out of that from a lot of people in mainstream media, it's another check on our ability to be open and to be transparent. So we now have a very aggressive correction policy, which is everything we, even if we make, other than changing juxtaposed letters or something that's just literally a typo, everything has to get a clarification or correction at the top of any story. So if you ever go to WashingtonPost.com, if a story has been corrected or clarified, at the top of the article, not the bottom, but at the top is a clarification that explains that we changed an earlier version, and depending on how complicated the change was, we'll then list out why we made the changes. Part of it, and some of this stemmed from, we had an incident 3 years ago, maybe it was 4 years ago now, with our ombudsman, Deborah Howell, wrote a column about Jack Abramoff, where she stated in this ombudsman's column that he had received money from both Democrats. He had donated money to both Republicans and Democrats. The left-wing blogosphere was not too keen on this particular assertion because in actuality, from a professional standpoint, Abramoff had given to both parties, but from a personal standpoint, he had given only to Republicans. And the assertion was Deborah was trying to make something into a bipartisan scandal that was a Republican scandal. And there was long conversations about how to address the fact that she was being attacked in the blogosphere for a Sunday ombudsman's column. So Wednesday, we agreed that she would write something that would clarify the issue. But she didn't really want to say that I got this wrong. She sort of said, if you thought that I meant this was a bipartisan scandal, you probably read the original column wrong. I didn't mean it. It was an apology that didn't work, and it actually just inflamed things even more. And led to essentially the next 24 hours getting about 2,500 comments. Basically, most of probably the 6 or 7 biggest left-wing blogs got together and said, everybody go to WashingtonPost.com, go to this one blog, and post a comment saying your ombudsman is a Nazi or she's the worst person ever put on the face of the earth. So we spent the next 3 days trying to deal with this unbelievable wave of vitriol that was hitting our website. Eventually had to close down the blog where all this was happening for a couple of days until we got some security measures in place and were able to staff up a little bit to handle the message board area. This was a classic example of if we had just said right from the start, the original column was wrong, I stated something that was factually incorrect, this is what actually happens, we would have avoided that problem. And lessons like that we've learned over the years have just always taught us that be clear that you screwed something up and the fire is much smaller than if you try to dissemble. So this is one. So that's why you'll see our correction policy is very aggressive, and we try to do everything we can to make sure small fires don't erupt. Third one, and to me is the most fascinating of all of them in some ways. It's data and it's information, and it's what does data mean when you what is data, even if it's public? How does it change if you assemble it in a certain way on a website? And this comes in the I work with ASNE, American Society of News Editors, as part of an ONA board member on a public records project we're working on now, where we're trying to digitize as many public records as possible. And the people from ASNE I work with use this term practical obscurity. There's a lot of public information that there's many things on the web that are in fact public information, but they're very, very hard to actually find. You have to go to a courthouse or you have to go someplace to track this information down. If we take all of that information and we database it in a way that makes it unbelievably easy to access, have we changed the form of that in a way that really is, from a legal perspective or even an ethical perspective, problematic? I'll give you two examples. One, a couple of years ago, the Lansing State Journal in Michigan decided to publish the salaries of all state employees. Public information, nothing in there that you couldn't find if you really went to dig for it. But they assembled it in an easy-to-search database, so if you're sitting at your cubicle in Lansing somewhere and you wonder if the schmuck next to you actually makes more money than you do, you could actually find it really easily. And this, of course, caused a huge firestorm, and people were absolutely outraged that they would actually do this. And I'll just read I was looking at it this morning, and a letter that was written in protest basically summarizes this point. It said, laws and precedents of its courts have long held that the information we published, state, employee name, department, salary, should be open to inspection by any member of the public. Anyone can request that information under FOIA or for the judicial branch. But the person who's writing the letter says, but open to inspection is a far cry from a searchable online database, and the Lansing State Journal should know that. And I think after this happened, someone actually went and found a bunch of salaries of Lansing State Journal employees and put them up someplace to sort of show this is what happens when you want this all to be made public, we'll make something public too. I'm not sure that information was public, but obviously they were trying to make a point. And another example, this is sort of a Google issue, and this is sort of one of the more interesting ethical challenges we had faced at our time. It's not a major issue, but it sort of shows to me as it's just something where we really struggle with what to do, and I won't even tell you what we did. I'll actually get your opinion. We got a call from a guy who said, "You guys are screwing up my life because of Google, because of something you wrote in 1998." This was a gentleman who had been arrested for a crime, a relatively unpleasant crime that was thrown out of court. The charges were thrown out 3 weeks later. He called up and he said, when I search on my name on Google, the first thing that comes up is the story about my being arrested. But the story about the charges being thrown out, which we did write about, nowhere to be found. And this is unfair, and I'm talking to a lawyer, and I want you to do something about it. And we, of course, did what all newspapers do at first, and we said, it's Google. We have no idea what their algorithm is. We don't know why this story is showing up here and this story is showing up on the 7th page of search. We don't know their algorithm. In fact, they're so protective of that algorithm, we really can't tell you why it's showing up. And what he wanted us to do is kill it and just say, get rid of the story, just kill it off your servers, and that'll solve the problem. And our policy is we never kill anything off that was in the newspaper. That was a story that was written in the newspaper, and we're not going to take it down off the website. You were arrested. Yes, you were also the charges were indeed thrown out later, and we don't know why that's not showing up. 2 weeks later, our marketing VP comes up, who knew a lot about search engine optimization, and said, I think I know why it's showing up first. Because back in 1998, before we had a dynamic website, the URLs of all of our stories were basically the slugs that the newspaper had chosen to write the story. And he said, I think the reason this one's showing up all the way at the top is because his name is in the URL of this story. So it was, guy's name 18 was his first story, and acquittal 3 was the second story. And he said, I think if we actually republish the story with the guy's name not in the URL, it would drop way, way down in Google. And so we had this essentially like a 90-minute debate about whether that was okay or not, intentionally deflating the importance of a story to try to make somebody's public profile, look more balanced. So we spent 90 minutes talking about it. So how many people here would have republished a story with a different URL to balance it out? How many people would not have? We republished it. The thinking being, the fact that the guy's name was in the URL is because a copy editor or an assignment editor at the newspaper who had no concept of how that slug would ever be used in a digital world just chose the guy's name as the slug, versus 2 weeks later another assignment editor decided to call it acquittal to. Didn't seem like a good enough reason to us to have the guy's reputation, for the most part, not look so good if you put his name into Google. This was someone who had a business and was trying to... The second link was the guy's business. So think about how that looks in Google. You put the guy's name in Google, and the first thing is he's arrested for a relatively bad crime, and the second one is I'd love to do business with him. So we could understand his anger. And so we did republish it in that case because we felt like the reason that it was appearing at the top was completely incidental and not really due to any a lot of other people weren't linking to the story. All the things that make things rise in Google, none of them seemed to work except for the fact the guy's name was in the URL. So we published it as arrest 18, and it dropped basically down to the same page in Google that the other story was at, which we thought was a sort of fair, balanced representation of this guy's life. But that, we deal with this in databases all the time. We put up our own federal workers searchable database about 5 years ago and took it down relatively quickly after a pretty big outcry in Washington for the same reason. So we deal with that a lot too, which is just because something is public, if you assemble it in an easily digestible way, how much do you have to weigh the consequences legally and ethically of making information like that available to anybody via a very, very basic search? Fourth thing we deal with a lot, what you were talking about before, is user-generated content. User-generated content has been an absolutely key driver of increasing traffic and loyalty to WashingtonPost.com. It's been something we've been pushing very aggressively the last 5 years. That with so many great sites on the web, one of the ways you can keep people on your site is to have them engage with other people and build relationships and build affinities between groups of whether they're Redskins fans or federal workers or local musicians, whatever it is. So we've been very, very aggressive at trying to build those types of communities. But when you try to build those types of communities in an emerging world like this, you deal with a lot of problems. And the problems generally we have dealt with, and just for a policy standpoint, we don't moderate comments before they're published. We don't do that for two reasons. Everybody thinks the reason is largely just legal. The general philosophy, which I think you were talking about when I came in before, is our lawyer's attitude is basically publish, and then if we get alerted to a problem, then we just have to act quickly to remove it. So legal is one reason we let people publish first. But more importantly, for me at least, is when you have people on your website who want to talk to each other, that conversation needs to happen relatively quickly. And if you're telling people you're going to, write a comment here, and when our people get around to looking at it in 2.5 hours, we'll put it up. You're losing that person. That person wants to stick around now, and they want to engage in the conversation. They want to see how their comment or their thought is reacted to by other readers. So we feel like it slows the process down in a way that's not helpful for the site. So we post-moderate, and we have profanity filters, but as anybody who reads comment areas on any website knows, people are very, very clever about getting around profanity filters with a creative use of asterisks and a variety of other means. But we have something like 1,500 words in our profanity database. If you ever want a funny read, you should just read the list. Gets sent out about every 6 months. Here are all the names that are in our block list, and it's just like, I can't believe I'm reading this. But I don't even know what some of these are. So we have been, probably of all the really aggressive things the website's launched over the last 5 years, the one that has been the most problematic in dealing with the paper has been comments on articles, because reporters don't necessarily like, and nor should they be, like being called all sorts of names on their own website. So we've gotten more aggressive. We have more people monitoring comments now. But where we run into the issues generally fall into 4 general areas. It's hate speech, some of which is covered by the profanity filter, but not a lot. But our monitors who monitor comments, when I say we post-moderate, by the way, it doesn't mean we don't have people looking at articles all day long trying to find stuff to take down. It's just that we don't look at everyone before it goes live. We have moderators who know certain subject areas that they have to look at. They have to look at local crime. They have to look at politics. They have to look at opinions. They have to look at anything about the Middle East, anything about the war in Iraq, and sadly anything about the Redskins. All fall in the category of our kind of nastiest areas. So we do have people looking at certain areas and looking at stories that are linked off the homepage because it's more likely to be more comments and thus more trouble. But hate speech is one that we clearly deal with, and profanity is the second. The third one is use of fake names. This is, if somebody goes on a message board and posts something saying, I'm the worst president in the history of the United States, signed George W. Bush, you kind of know that's a joke. We still take it down because you can't use fake names, but there's no real threat that anybody's going to think the president is hanging around our site posting comments on articles. But we have had people posting under the names of Jerry Connolly, who's a Fairfax County supervisor. We've had people posting under the names of prominent lawyers in the city, stating their opinions on certain things, or politicians in the city. So that's a problem for us, and we try very hard to make sure that, in fact, there's a lot of names of famous people in the Washington area that we just set up accounts for just to block them from being set up by anybody else. So there's certain public officials who, even if they wanted to go in and set up an account that was their name, they wouldn't be able to do it. Now, they could do George W. Bush 23, but I guess they could do 43 probably, but that's a problem we've had. That's probably, of all the legal issues, that's the one that scares us the most in a lot of ways, where if a public official, is basically someone's trying to act like they're posting something very controversial and he didn't write it. We worry about that because that's the one we get a lot of calls on. And the fourth one is spam, which is more of a technical issue than anything else. The fifth thing we're dealing with a lot now is fair use. Fair use is in a world where distribution of video and distribution of content and distribution of snippets to Google is so prevalent. What is fair use is something we struggle with a lot. There's a company we work with now called Acture, which has really cool technology that allows you to basically roll over a link and if there's a video of Obama giving a speech at Grant Park, you could roll over Obama's name, or say he gave a speech at Grant Park, and if we highlighted a speech at Grant Park, you just roll over the link and a video window pops up and you can watch the video basically in a layer that's sitting on top of your website. Very, very cool technology. And where that's pulling in from YouTube directly. So is that on our site or not? It's not. We're essentially pulling it directly from YouTube, but it's appearing over on top of a WashingtonPost.com article, but the content doesn't reside on our server. So is that, if we run basically, if somebody puts up an episode of The Office and for some reason we wanted to clip that on the website, obviously that seems wrong somehow. But if it's something that somebody uploaded to YouTube and all we're doing is putting a layer on our website that allows us to pull that in and watch it, what have we done? Have we done anything that makes us culpable there? We've been pretty cautious on that one and not used anything. Like we don't use YouTube videos from any networks or anything that's protected programming on our site. But other sites that are using this technology are doing that, and their basic argument has been that content is not on our site. It's on somebody else's site. We're just pulling it in. It's basically the same thing. The argument is the same thing as a link. The technology is just better. Instead of linking to that video on YouTube, we're basically pulling in the video from YouTube. And if we made a link, nobody would be having this conversation. So we're trying to figure out where that boundary is. Same thing applies to topics pages we do, which automatically pull in any video related to a topic. A lot of the videos that get pulled in are from sites like YouTube where there are copyright problems. So we struggle with that a fair amount. The other one is embedding. If you look at a lot of video players now, you can actually embed video in your site. So we can go to the New York Times or any site, if they have embed code, we can take that on our site. And on WashingtonPost.com, you'll see a blog post that'll have New York Times embedded video in it. But we found out not that long ago that just because somebody puts embed code on a video player doesn't mean you can actually use it, that there's actually a fair amount of rules around. Our argument was always if somebody puts an embed code on a video player, they're basically asking you to reproduce it on your site. We tried to take a Washington Redskins video, which had embed code on it, and put it on our site. And we have a wonderful relationship with the Washington Redskins, and that is incredibly sarcastic. They don't like us, we don't like them, because they're incredibly difficult to deal with on these issues. They called up and said, you can't do that. So that you guys put embed code on your video player, and we just put it on our site. He said, yeah, just because we have embed code on it doesn't mean you guys can use it. Just read our policy, and it basically says the Redskins have the right to tell anybody that you can't use the embed code even if it's actually on the player. So we took it down because in their particular legal argument, in that particular case, it was clear in their thing that they could tell somebody that we couldn't run it. Of course, it goes against the entire theory of embed codes, which is to get your stuff spread around the internet. But that's more of a personal thing, I think, than a traffic driving thing. So fair use is a bit odd right now because of all these technologies that sort of put a layer between your site and another site. these pop-up windows and things of the sort are making it harder to determine where something actually lives at one time or another. And the last one is just dealing with sales issues. That, in the online world, sales and editorial content interact in ways that they don't in a newspaper. There are ads that fly over content. There are ads that extend out over content. You can buy very, very specific pages on a website if you want to. So we deal with a lot of, this is probably more ethical than legal as well, issues of if Obama comes to the Obama campaign came to us and said, we want to buy every ad on your website on election day. What would we do? We would say no, because we don't feel like, yes, we love the money, but we feel like we did this in 04, on election day 04, John Kerry basically bought all the ads on the homepage. So you go to WashingtonPost.com's homepage on election day 2004, there's 4 huge John Kerry ads on it. It didn't help that we endorsed Kerry, but they really were not related. But somebody coming to the site who was cynical about it would probably say, well, that's a shocker. They endorsed John Kerry and their entire homepage is John Kerry ads on election day, no less. So we have a lot of rules around how many ads, what kind of advocacy ads and what kind of political ads we can run in certain areas of the site and what frequency. And that's the last one's probably the least interesting. Those are generally the things we spend most of our time dealing with in these new ethical, legal times. I'm glad to take any questions or talk about anything else.
Jim, this whole business about changing a story that you think is not factual, or perhaps there's even a tainted libel or something. But what have your lawyers told you? Because that doesn't really protect you. You still publish the libel or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So how does that manifest itself? How does that play out?
Well, I mean, if you publish the story and it libels somebody, the fact that even if we pulled it off the site and killed it isn't going to help you on that front. So I think the idea is to, you're better off, if you have a story that's got a problem and the lawyers think you need to change it to, you're better off putting the story back up with a clarification that says an earlier version of the story misrepresented the relationship between X and X, and we've now, I think if you're the person who's been libeled, you'd certainly rather have the story upright than get pulled down just because the original wasn't. So our attitude is let's get it right. Let's keep changing it. If we have to change it a couple of times to get it right, that's fine. Let's just be clear about what it is we've changed. So, and again, I think this comes up all the time where someone, largely, people who have, someone from the paper will call up and say, I made a big mistake in my story and I need the website to take it down now. And our argument is always that is the worst thing you can possibly do. This is an A1 story that, remember, there are hundreds of sites pointing to this story right now. I mean, everyone is linking to this story. If you take the story down, those links are now dead. And the minute somebody clicks on a story about, what let's say it's a national security story, you click on that link from Drudge, you click on that thing from Google about a huge national security story, and you get a not found page. Like, that's an immediate red flag that something is awry, that you have taken the story down. And the minute the story is down, that's when the conspiracy theories start. And, the cover-up is always worse than the crime, right? And so if you just fix the story, and there have been times where we have had problems with stories that require hours of sort of rewriting of the story, and in cases like that, at least once or twice, we've put something up that has said, a new version of this story will be coming shortly to clarify certain areas, just so we were even saying, there's something coming, it's not ready yet. But the pulling it down completely is something that we have done almost extremely rarely, and not in the last couple of years at all. I just feel like it's, again, brush fires, it's what turns a brush fire into an inferno if you take the story down. And because the conspiracy theory is always, the Bush administration must have called or something and told them to take it down. And often it's just like, we have the 13th graph, there's a assertion of criminality that maybe we need to be a little clearer about. This came up the other day with a story we were writing about a hosting firm in California that hosts a lot of sites that do nefarious stuff on the web, spam sites, porn sites, and things like that. And the original story we put up basically said, the company that was shut down by its ISPs, basically, so this hosting service went offline, basically. The original story basically said that these guys, this company had done something criminal because they were hosting these things, and after reading it, the lawyer said, probably ought to back off of that a little bit because it's pretty vague whether hosting somebody doing bad things on a website is a criminal act in and of itself. It's a matter of whether you know about it and what level of knowledge you have about what they're doing. But our lawyer said this is a gray area right now in terms of we can't say that these guys committed a crime. We can say that they hosted sites that were doing malicious things because that much we had. So, but we went in and changed it and put a clarification up that basically said in an earlier version, we clarified an earlier version of the story to can't remember exactly what the wording was, but to clarify the role of Makolo in this, in the criminal acts. So that's why I think it's always good to be transparent.
I confess I wasn't following too well, I guess, that when you were talking about user-generated content, it sounded to me as if you were saying that you do nothing with postings before they go up, but then I heard some qualifiers. I didn't know whether you meant that after they go up when you're monitoring them, then this is what you filter them for, or whether there is any initial filtering at all. And if you could sort of expand your answer, the answer about post.com, but also you're active in the Online News Association. I know this is an active in the association. Any comments that you could make about what the conversation is within the Online News Association?
Sure. To clarify is that we do something technical before they go up. We run through a profanity filter, so if you put certain words in there, the post just won't go up. In fact, even better than that, this is one of the best little sneaky features that the website has. We work with a company called Pluck that built our community area. They actually have this thing called a bozo filter, which is a great name to itself. But it basically says if you use one of these 200 words and you try to post, it'll look like it posted to you. So and you will see it on your own browser as if it was up live, but nobody else will see it. So it basically prevents people from just keep trying to post until they can figure out how to get around the filter. They actually think it's live and they wonder why nobody's responding to their witty comments, because literally nobody else sees it. So that's been very helpful. But we do put that filter against it at first. We just don't have a human being reading the comment before it goes live. We basically will block posts that have certain words in it. And we can block people, too. We can block IP addresses. But blocking IP addresses gets tricky because you think you're shutting down the one guy and the one guy who's posting nasty comments, and you realize you shut down the entire Treasury Department or something. Connection because the IP address can be real hard to nail down and can cover up an awful lot of people. So, but we can block certain people. You have to be registered on the website to post anything anyway, blogs or comments on articles, and that helps a fair amount. Because I think people who are so conspiratorial who post some of the really wild stuff are the ones who don't want to give you their name and information, so it actually kind of works in that way as well. An interesting thing that, well, let me finish that part first. So after it all goes up, we do have people who look at hotspots where we know there's going to be problems. So we don't just wait for the readers to flag things. We do look on our own. But every comment post in blogs and in articles, there is a link that says report abuse. So any reader can flag something and say this post is a problem. It's hate speech, it's off topic, it's spam, whatever it is. And then we have people who monitor that queue all day long.
Are the readers pretty active?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What's a hotspot, Jim? Define a
hotspot is like the Iraq War. It's a subject area where we know there's always trouble. Like the food section, we don't have a whole lot of patrolling. We don't find that there's a lot of hate speech, and we're talking about cucumbers. So we stick to those areas I mentioned before, where you just know there's going to be trouble. Especially in like the Redskins this week. They play the Cowboys this week, so it's a really fun week for the Redskins area when they play the Cowboys. So what we've also interesting thing, which we have found, is we just started working with this company it's called Seismic out on the West Coast, and they do video comments. And it allows anybody with a webcam to basically comment on something and upload the video directly to the site. So we experimented with it 2 or 3 times, and we've probably gotten about 300 video comments now, and we've removed one that was inappropriate. And we're hoping that as things move forward, the people who post video comments are going to be of a higher quality, because there is something about your face being on the web that is going to probably prevent a lot of people from saying the things they say when they're just an anonymous person writing nasty stuff. And so we've been really, very happy so far at seeing how good the comments have been when people have had to put their face in there. And I do think one of the things I personally believe is that in the next 5 years, identity management on the web is going to become a pretty big topic. You already see this OpenID and a lot of things going on the web where people, it will be easier to confirm that somebody is who they say they are on the web. Right now, I go to a lot of conferences and people will say, why don't you just make people use their real names? Which is a wonderful ideal, but I have no way of knowing if that's somebody's real name or not when you put it up there. I mean, you can check it against an email address, you can check it against a credit card number, but you don't necessarily know that the person who's put their name in that's actually their name. So, but there is a lot of development going on in that area to eventually have people be able to say, like, I can verify that I am who I say I am. And that's where I kind of hope we go, because anonymity is really the problem for us on the web. We have a lot of problems with anonymity and people. The 95% of the people who cause the trouble on WashingtonPost.com's comments area are using a non-name username. It's some George Bush is a Nazi 2011 or whatever it is, or we get a lot of those, and but then you hardly ever get one from people using a name that might be a real name. So that's what we're focusing on, trying to find some technologies that'll help us in that space, because the quality of comments, if in some of our blogs that are less controversial topics, you read these comments areas and they're phenomenal in terms of the dialogue that's going on between people. Comments get legitimately at this point somewhat of a bad rap. Well, they have a bad rap, and some of that is legitimate, because if you look at where the politics, especially, and you look at the war, you do see a lot of horrific stuff with people who are really seem to be coming out of a hole to post. But when you look at areas that are not so emotional, areas like, we have a blog called Government Inc., which is about federal contracting, and the people who are posting comments in there are having this unbelievably high-level discussion about this topic. And nobody comes in there and disrupts that. That's a very small community, but the quality of that conversation is phenomenal. And we have more of those than we have the really bad ones, but the bad ones get all the press. So that's why we're hoping these things can help beat that out.
As far as the substance goes, do you have specific criteria that you use? Obviously, if something's hate speech, but what about things like conspiracy theories, things that could conceivably have a grain of truth to them?
Yeah, conspiracy theories, as long as there's no profanity, no hate speech, we'll leave some of those up. We have the things that hate speech, personal attacks, which is a gray one, because it also goes to the issue of a personal attack against the president is maybe different than an example was, and this happened, I think, the Orange County Register, I think. It's like a year ago, they wrote a story about a woman who was so obese that she was pregnant and didn't know it until she gave birth. Literally, it was, and they didn't have any guards on their comments. In fact, their attitude was, we don't even take them down after they're posted. And the comments on this thing were just, as you can imagine, they were unbelievable. They were racist. It was barely a comment in the thing that was useful. So, that's a clear. But take a less egregious example. You write a story about a private citizen who's, a feature story about them because they're in the news for some reason, but it's not something they're not a public official, they weren't elected to anything, they're not a movie star or a professional athlete. So we have a little bit of a different layer of personal attack on a private citizen who's the subject of a story than a public attack on a politician or a public figure. But personal attack is the hardest one, because those are the ones you tend to read the most and say, is that a personal attack or not? Sometimes they're borderline. But conspiracy theories you don't necessarily take down. We take down spam, hate speech, personal attacks, off topic. Another one we try to aggressively do too is the nice thing about comments on articles is if you tell people you have to talk about the article, it prevents things from going off in some direction that has nothing to do with the article. So those are the 4 criteria we use generally.
I want to talk to you about your first trade-off between speed and accuracy. And obviously, the need for speed has always been part of journalistic lore, wanting to have the scoop and so on. And you said that it's accelerated and intensified because of the blend of the 24-hour news cycle of online, of broadcast news outlets, and then the competitive pressures of everybody being online at the same time. And that story is very common, and you hear it all the time, and particularly for sites like yours, which were affiliated with a great newspaper, part of what you, I'm sure, tell one another, and what I hear a lot of other folks tell one another in similar situations is it's a mechanism for corporate survival because there's a fear that the Los Angeles Times will die, the Washington Post will die, the New York Times will die, etc. And this allows you to compete in that market. And one of the ways you compete is you can break a story at 8 seconds.
Right.
So all that's very understandable. Here's my question. There's a counter pressure, and the counter pressure is what is it that you have to sell people and offer people as the classic division between the professional journalism, the journalist and mainstream media dissolves, and in fact everybody is a journalist. And it strikes me that that's accuracy and authenticity and sourcing and legitimacy and so on. And if you go too far down the speed road, you lose arguably your biggest asset, which is that you are a reliable site. And then the last little piece of it, on that level, to me, a consumer of news, it would matter to me if you were 2 days behind the Wall Street Journal or CNN, It doesn't matter a bit to me if you're 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 hours, or maybe even a day sometimes. That's inside baseball to you all. You care a lot about that, and you start to get broken first on, well, most of the rest of us could care less. We got it first exactly. But we probably care a lot on the nuances of, whether there are openly sourced people, it's anonymously sourced, the story's nailed down or not nailed down, etc. And that's where your reputation matters to the consumers.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't think I think we've been pretty. I mean, some would probably argue we've been too conservative on that particular trade-off. I mean, we actually on election night call the states on. We have we do the same apparatus as AP and the networks to call states, and people, a lot of them at the website, a lot of them at the newspaper say, God, we are so slow calling states. We call Pennsylvania like an hour and a half after the networks call Pennsylvania. But that's, I mean, we are slow on that front, but I do think, get it right is much more important than get it first. And we struggle at times with, the things we struggle with are actually less. I'll give you an example of the struggle we actually have is there are times we actually have broken something, and we are the first person to have it, and the hard part is getting the reporter to write it now because it's 5 o'clock and I need to sit down and actually write the story for the paper. So I can't give you a full story now. And it's like, we don't want a full story now. You've broken something, give us 4 graphs to slap it up on the website. As long as you're comfortable with it, we'll put it up on the website. So the website pushes for speed a little bit more. Clearly the paper does. But I think we've had a pretty good balance, but that's actually been the challenge. It's like you actually have something, and why wouldn't you want to put that up immediately? Why wait? Because I don't have time to write a fully fleshed out 24-inch story. We don't need that. We need 5 graphs that say this is what the story is, and we'll be glad to sub it out with your 24-inch version when it hits the paper later. So I don't think we're, at this particular point, not in much danger of overplaying that hand, because I think we're still trying to find the right balance. But yeah, I think it comes up a lot with, here, another interesting example of, an issue we face. Because there is so much information out there, it used to be in the old days, the Washington Post, the media as a whole could determine what was worth reporting and what wasn't worth reporting. If there was a scurrilous rumor out there somewhere that everybody in the media heard but nobody thought there was anything to it, you could decide whether you write that or not. Right? 2004, the rumor goes around that John Kerry's having an affair or had an affair at some point during the campaign. Everybody in the media had heard it. Nobody had really been able to nail that in any way that they could report it. But the blogosphere was raging about this John Kerry affair, running through the blogosphere like crazy. We had this big debate about, as a mainstream media news organization, are we obligated to at least acknowledge that we're hearing it and that we're looking into it, or we've looked at it and said there's nothing to it? Do we have to change what we actually report because there's so much information out there that didn't come from us, but that everybody looks at our website and says, this rumor is raging around the internet today, and the Washington Post is so dumb and so slow and so out of it, they don't even have it on their website. Now, the reason we don't have it on the website is we didn't think there was anything to it. And we had reported it out and determined there really wasn't anything to it. But should you actually say that? We've looked into this and there's nothing to it. And we have no problem. And our reporting has shown that we can't write that story because we don't. Or are you just making it worse by doing that? Are you spreading it even more by having it on your site? We didn't put it up. We just decided to let it die, and it died a relatively quick death. But you do have those issues too, issues of what to do with the Virginia Tech package that Kit brought to NBC. Like, should we take screenshots from that and put it up on the website? Which is a slightly different ethical challenge, but and that was the case where that was NBC's property, and we basically were just putting it up because we thought it was fair use and it was a new story. But so there's an awful lot of these ethical issues we still struggle with about what is the changing role of media in the world today, and do we have to rethink what we report and how we communicate it to the readers. But going back to the original question, I think right now we're still in pretty safe ground on this. I think one thing we're doing, though, because we're so interested in making sure we plant the flag of the Washington Post if we break something, and most big sites do this now, because they have a PR operation at the website that the minute we post something up that says, Washington Post is reporting that, Obama is going to name X person as cabinet secretary. We send that to every political blog that we possibly can so that somebody will put that up on the website and we can claim we had it first. Because, then everybody says for the next 24 hours, the Washington Post reported. So it actually is more of a PR battle now than it is anything else. You just want to get there first so you can plant the flag and say, we had it first. So, interesting times.
Back to this business of the YouTube example that you gave, it's suddenly YouTube videos popping up on top of the story. So, and this was actually a bit of an issue in the moot court question before you came. This business of being a passive acceptance of other people's stuff. Has this ever caused you a problem?
No, we've been very conservative, which is probably why. But there's a lot of issues with this particular application. And if you go to apture.com, you can look at how it works. It's hard to explain, but the other problem is if we pull in a video from the New York Times into that, we run advertising against it. It's their content we're running advertising against. And this little window that pops up does have advertising in it, or can have advertising in it. It doesn't always. And for us, our lawyers have basically said if somebody did that to us, we would go after them. So we're not going to do it to anybody else, which is, I can accept that as a good logic. So when we pull in any content from anybody that's not from the Post, we just block advertising. But we still have to figure that out. I mean, I went to Pointer 3 years ago with 15 other people who've been doing this for a long time, and the goal was to spend 3 days and come out with a guideline for online ethics. And it was 3 of the most painful days of my life, and I'm sure the other 15 people who went, because you're getting into these long debates about issues like, what does a link mean? Is a link just a connection to other content? Is it an endorsement of the content that's behind that link? Like, what does a link actually mean to the reader? What is the relationship to the Washington Post to what they're linking to? Is it just information, or is it like, you should go look at this? And basically where we came out was, so many of these things are so open for interpretation that for Pointer, or the Online News Association for that matter, to put out like, here's a code of ethics for online journalism, there's so much gray area still. I mean, there's codes of ethics. I mean, the Washington Post has a different code of ethics than the New York Times and has the Wall Street Journal and the USA Today. And so I don't think I doubt there will ever be like one code of ethics for online journalism. There's certain journalism ethics that are sort of paramount, and they don't change under any platform. But a lot of these things we're talking about today, fair use and use of databases, I mean, everyone's right now just making their own calls on those because they're very open for interpretation. So in that particular case, we've chosen to be conservative. In the case of UGC, user-generated content, we've been aggressive. So I think everybody just kind of has to decide whether they want to put themselves on that sort of range of options.
Have you guys been sued since you've been there?
Oh, sure.
User-generated content stuff?
Not user-generated content. We've been sued a couple times over data. People want their home sales taken out of the database. And we will do that if there's a sort of documents are provided to us that show a physical threat. If it's someone who's got, who's being stalked, and they don't want that information out there. So if there's some sort of proof of physical harm, we'll remove something from the home sales database. But somebody calls up and says, I just don't want it in there.
What about libel?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Paper has. I mean, obviously,
yeah.
they're producing, 80% of the original journalism that the combined entities produce, but no, we've not been. We've been threatened, of course, and often that will lead to a clarification correction. But we've been we've done pretty well in terms of avoiding major issues. The only major lawsuit that we've been involved in is I may get some of the details wrong, but is a diplomat who we wrote something about he did not like, and he sued us in international court because the story was available in Canada. And he said he didn't sue us in the U.S. court, he sued us in, I think it was a Canadian court, because we had, I can't remember what it was, but there was an allegation of something we wrote about him. And because the laws are different, obviously, in Canada, the libel laws that came after us from Canada, and there was a big case about whether the fact that a website's available all over the world, does that change where you can be sued and the venue can be. And we ended up winning that one. But that's the only really major litigation I think the Post.com's been involved in the last couple of years. So we've been pretty, I don't know what you want to call it, lucky. But we do spend a lot of time talking about this stuff. And I really do think it's the most fascinating part about working on right now is these things are just completely brand new issues. And the data one is the one I'm just really obsessed with because I would love to be able to put this, immense amounts of information online, but boy, you can really make it very easy to find out an awful lot about the person who lives next door to you, and that information may have really no value. And one of the debates that people have these days are, you could put all that data up, but just don't let it be searchable. if somebody wants to tunnel into it and find one name somewhere, that's fine, but don't make it easy to search the entire database. I'm not sure how much that helps. Somebody who's really determined can still get everything they want to get, but we're debating those issues now as we do new databases about how much flexibility do you want to give for people to be able to basically pull the entire database in when that may not be appropriate.
So the privacy, you're saying, it's really
Yeah.
a privacy issue.
Yeah, I mean, the public records thing I'm doing, ONA and ASNE are doing together, it's, we want to put public records online. Well, public records, that's a pretty broad category. I mean, but our attitude is the kinds of public records you want to have online, like bridge inspections and restaurant inspections and things that are sort of useful to the broader population, but we're not talking about putting people's divorce records online. I don't think anybody would think that's the right thing to do. Having been divorced once, I would agree. But I think where you draw the line in public records is something we're debating a lot too, because a lot of that is useful to as I said, the wider population. A lot of it is just nobody's business, really, even if it's technically a public document.
In terms of search engine optimization, has WashingtonPost.com done anything to make it when you search for Obama, that your story pops up first before the New York Times? Does that seem like a way to get more users to click on that link versus getting the story first?
Yeah, we have a team of 4 that works on search engine optimization. And we have all sorts of tactics we use to try to get higher on Google. But everybody does, and Google, once everybody figures it out, then Google just goes and changes the algorithm and won't tell you how to change it. So you're going to spend the next 6 months trying to figure out why your stuff just dropped 4 pages in Google. But one of the things we do is we have what's called a web headline. There's a headline, if you look at, take a typical style section story, huge photo on the front page, 5-column photo with a headline that just is like a life interrupted. Great in print, because you see who the person is, you see the big picture, and the headline makes sense. And you got a subhead. On the web, as far as Google is concerned, they have no idea what that story is about. No clue. Who it's about, what it's about. If the story is about a local museum, if it's about the Thievery Corporation, which is a band in D.C., the editors of the newspaper will actually write a headline that'll say Thievery Corporation hits it big or something. You put as many sort of pronouns in there as you can, so put a location, a place, a band name, whatever it is. And then we put that at the top of the page, so Google actually sees that headline first. It doesn't see the post headline first, because the post headline is essentially useless to Google. So we have probably 10 or 12 tactics like that we try to get stuff higher in. But the key is getting a lot of people to link to your stuff. And that's really, it's a link economy at Google. And so we got our presidential profile pages up first. I think we were the first big site to get a list of everybody who was running and links to, all their financial histories and voting records in Congress, if they were in Congress. And because we got them up first, people started pointing to them early. So if you searched on presidential candidates, for the most of the last 2 years, we were the first or second thing that came up, which meant those presidential pages went from getting what might have been 5,000 page views a day to getting 75,000 page views a day. So we have a lot of people working on SEO because it's huge. Anybody who's not spending a lot of resources trying to get higher in Google is crazy, because Google drives an unbelievable amount of traffic to every news website. And if you're, and of course they will never tell you how they do it, which is what makes us all crazy. But it's fair; they don't tell anybody. So,
Jim, of the 6 issues that you outlined, which one or ones do you spend the most time each day on?
Most time each day on is probably UGC. Sure, for first, that's clearly the one I spend the most on. I think the second one's probably sales issues. To be honest, every advertiser wants something special. That's the joke now at our place. Nobody ever wants a standard advertisement anymore. It's got to fly over something, or it's got to expand out over something, or it's. So we actually, this is talk about differences between the print and the website. We actually meet with sales every day at 4 o'clock. I meet with the VP of sales, and we go over any intrusive ads. We go over any advertisers we want to buy on the site or on our competitive list. We review any advocacy, any political ads, and things like that. So, a lot of issues come up with that. Sales often wants to use, for example, can you guys make a fake homepage that an ad can be? They wanted to do one a couple weeks ago, which was WashingtonPost.com. It was a beer, I don't remember which beer company it was, but the homepage would come up and it would fill up from the bottom with beer. And they said, well, I said, my rule. My rule is you can't use Washington Post journalism as a prop in an ad, and that's something we all agreed on. That we're not going to be. He said, well, don't worry, it's not real WashingtonPost.com. It's just a fake homepage. I'm like, That's not better. It's not an improvement. That would be a fake WashingtonPost.com homepage filling up with beer. So we have to have discussions about things like that. So sales is probably the one I spend the second most time on. It's a good ad. I mean, it's effective ad. I would love to see it on the New York Times.
Please join me in thanking
Yeah.
Jim for his past